Okay, continuing with the cavernous sinus thrombosis, which is the stage 5 of the orbital cellulitis modified Chandler staging. Okay, what is cavernous sinus thrombosis? It is a blood clot in the cavernous sinus. It is caused by the spread of bacterial infection from the nasal sinuses, teeth, ear, eye, nose, skin into the cavernous sinus, which is located intracranially. May also occur after any head trauma or injury. It starts initially as a unilateral condition that is affecting one side, which becomes bilateral soon after in more than 50% cases. Why does it become bilateral? Because of the intercavernous communication. Hence, clinical features in the opposite side is a strong diagnostic indicator of the cavernous sinus thrombosis. Most common pathogen involved in the cavernous sinus thrombosis are Staph aureus in 70% of the individuals and followed by Streptococcus species. Anaerobes are more common when the underlying condition is a dental or the sinus infection. These are the various tributaries of the cavernous sinus. The cavernous sinus gets blood supply from the drainage of the air and supplies the jugular vein. It also has supplies to the pterygoid plexus. It also has a communication with the pterygoid plexus. There are also communications with the meninges through the middle meningeal vein. The tributaries of the orbit that connect with the cavernous sinus are the superior ophthalmic vein, which itself is supplied with the superior orbital vein, the angular vein communications, the nasal veins, the superior. So any infection in any part we can lead to the cavernous sinus if the infection spreads interior to the inside of the cranium, that is the brain. Okay. What is the pathophysiology of the cavernous sinus thrombosis? You might remember that the third, fourth ophthalmic and the maxillary branches of the fifth cranial nerve are located on the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus from the anatomy class, and the sixth nerve is located inside the cavernous sinus. So whenever cavernous sinus thrombosis will be there, the important point here is the sixth nerve is involved first and then the rest of the nerves are involved. And the complications of the cavernous sinus thrombosis may include meningoencephalitis, brain abscess, stroke, blindness, pituitary insufficiency because of the spread to the brain. What are the symptoms of the cavernous sinus thrombosis? There is an abrupt onset of fever, chills, rigors. There will be vomiting. The patient will present as a severe pain in the eye and the forehead of the affected side localized to the retroorbital and the frontal regions. Eyelid edema develops and often becomes bilateral. There will be swollen conjunctiva, there will be the protrusion of the eyeball, there will be diplopia. Because the lateral gaze is involved first because of the involvement of the sixth nerve, there will be the corneal anesthesia because of the involvement of the ophthalmic division of the maxillary nerve, and there will be the vision loss, but this is a relatively late feature. What are the signs seen in the cavernous sinus thrombosis? There will be the chemosis and congestion of the conjunctiva. There is a rapidly developing proptosis. There will be the ipsilateral ophthalmiplegia, that is the third, fourth and sixth. All nerves palsy will be there. The ophthalmoplegia will be sequential, that is the sixth is involved first, after that the third and the fourth is involved. There will be loss of corneal reflex because of the involvement of ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve. The third nerve palsy leads to ptosis, dilated pupils, absent direct and consensual pupillary light reflexes on the ipsilateral side. There will be the edema in the mastoid region. If there is an edema in the mastoid region in a patient with orbital cellulitis, it is pathognomic for cavernous sinus thrombosis. Okay, the fundus. The fundus is normal initially, but later the retinal vein congestion and papilloedema can be seen. Decreased level of consciousness, confusion, seizures, and focal neurological deficits are seen, which are the signs of CNS spread of the infection. What are the diagnosis and investigations done in CST? The features that distinguish cavernous sinus thrombosis from the orbital cellulitis include cranial nerve dysfunction, which is relatively rarely seen in orbital cellulitis. There will be the bilateral eye involvement and the mental status changes. MRI, what have to do, which investigation we will do to diagnose cavernous sinus thrombosis? We can do either an MRI or a CT. MRI is a better study. CT can be helpful. CT, and with both these investigations, we have to include the blood cultures and the lumbar puncture if required. What is the investigation of choice? In the case of cavernous sinus thrombosis, it is magnetic resonance venography. Why it is the investigation of choice? Because it shows the absence of the flow void in the thrombosed sinus. What is the treatment of the cavernous sinus thrombosis? It is treated with IV high dose antibiotics and sometimes corticosteroids along with NSAIDs. What are the initial antibiotics which we should give? Initial antibiotics have to be started with the neficillin, oxacillin or oxacillin class. Whenever there is in areas with MRSA, vancomycin can be given, and the drugs for anaerobes have to be started if there is a sinusitis or a dental infection. If there is a sphenoid sinusitis responsible for the cavernous sinus thrombosis, surgical sinus drainage has to be done, especially if there is no response to antibiotics within 24 hours. What are the secondary treatment for the cavernous sinus thrombosis? Corticosteroids can be given for cranial nerve dysfunctions in the dose of, as example is Dexa, 10 mg IV or orally every 6 hours. Anticoagulation can be given, but it is really controversial because most patients respond to antibiotics and adverse effects of anticoagulation may exceed the benefits. What are the prognosis? There is a 30% mortality in all the patients with cavernous sinus thrombosis, and if there is underlying sphenoid sinusitis, there is a 50% mortality rate. So the prognosis is worse if it is not treated. Additionally, 30% develop serious sequelae, for example, ophthalmoplegia, blindness, disability due to the stroke, pituitary insufficiency, which may be permanent. So along with this, we have to see the two syndromes, superior orbital fissure syndrome and the orbital apex syndrome. As we remember, the superior orbital fissure is a communication between the orbit and the middle cranial fossa, and the structures passing through it we have seen in the anatomy lecture. Therefore, the superior orbital fissure syndrome will not include the optic nerve and the ophthalmic artery changes. Rest all structures will be included. Because of the involvement of these structures, there will be the painful ipsilateral ophthalmoplegia because of the involvement of the third, fourth and the sixth nerves. There will be the retroorbital pain. There will be the sensory disturbances because of the involvement of the ophthalmic distribution of the trigeminal nerve, and there will be ptosis due to the involvement of the third nerve. What is the difference between orbital apex syndrome and the superior orbital fissure syndrome? So the orbital apex syndrome is the superior orbital fissure syndrome plus the optic nerve signs. There is an early visual loss and afferent pupillary defect caused by the involvement of the optic nerve in this case. Any etiology in the orbital apex, whether it is infective, neoplastic, granulomatous or traumatic, will lead to the orbital apex syndrome. Okay. In the next video, we will study about the orbital tumors.